Chapter 2. The spaghetti was done. Hearing the alarm she'd set on her phone, Rika took her eyes from the report draft filling her computer screen. Wading through the warm, weedy-smelling vapor to grasp the handles of the pan, she poured out its contents into the colander inside the sink. The stainless steel of the sink buckled, making a sound like a drum being struck, reverberating at her waist. A great plume of steam rose up, whitening her entire field of vision, before dispersing throughout her late-night kitchen with its single-plate hob. The steam wafted up to her cheeks and nose, wetting her skin. So intensely was the spaghetti glistening that it looked as if it were alive. She transferred it into a bowl, then opened up the fridge and took out the packet of Kalpas butter, the Pollock roe in its polystyrene tray sealed with cling film, along with a pack of shiso leaves, an unusually dark green for the season. The previous week, Rika had thrown out her packet of margarine, so despised by Manako Kajii, with the burnable rubbish. Since their previous meeting, Rika had once attempted to visit Kajii at the detention house and sent 2 letters. I tried out the recipe you told me right away. I was astonished to discover that something so delicious could be so easy to rustle up. I'll never again eat anything that's just a heap of trans fats. I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on fine cuisine, and to develop my own knowledge as well, so I can be an interesting conversational partner to you. Rika had chosen her words with great care, attempting to see things from Kajii's perspective as much as possible, but her efforts had been in vain. Still, she wasn't about to give up. She had to find a way of piquing Kajii's interest in her again, whatever it took. She knew the Kagurazaka supermarket stocked a wide range of imported goods. Its customers were principally affluent housewives and people from overseas, and she'd scooped up the last packet of Kalpas butter on the shelf. There was something soothing about its subdued brown and white packaging, with its banner reading superior quality. December was already more than half gone, and Christmas was fast approaching, and yet standard butter was still nowhere to be found in Tokyo. These expensive brands were the only kinds to be easily had. A sliver of butter perched atop a mound of steaming rice garnished with a single drop of soy sauce was a taste that had quickly become an addiction for Rika. She'd used lashings of the same butter on her morning toast, too, and as a result the 100 grams of ekire that she'd bought in the Marinucci store had vanished in just a few days. In the midst of the end-of-year rush at work, where she was having to shave off hours of sleep, she had no time to buy more. When her hunger became too much to bear, she decided to sate it with whatever was close at hand. Such had been her rationale for buying the Kalpas. As it happened, though, this alternative brand brought together a creamy richness reminiscent of condensed milk, with a clean, fresh aftertaste. It was a different species of deliciousness to ekire, whose umami-rich flavor lingered on and on eternally, and Rika took to it immediately. Rereading Manako Kajii's blog, Rika discovered that Kajii repeatedly sang the praises of Kalpas butter and felt a kind of pride that her taste buds had not misled her. Previously, Kajii's prose had seemed to her ever so turgid, but now, since her butter awakening, the odd phrases here and there would fall into her like droplets. Rika had asked for the cardboard box full of blog printouts, which you had been so impatient with her to tidy away, to be sent to her apartment. There was no space for it there either, so she had put away her table and resorted to perching a tray or placemat on top of the box so that it doubled as a dining table, resenting all the while how student-like it made her living situation. The recipes for the French dishes and cakes featured on Kajii's blog were far beyond Rika, reading to her like arcane magic spells hailing from another world, but this tarraco pasta, which required that its components be simply mixed together, seemed like something she could manage, and what was more, she had succeeded in locating the necessary ingredients at the late-night supermarket. These days, Rika hardly ever went into diners or bento takeout shops on her way home. She felt like the kind of meals she made, putting butter on hot rice or toast, and eating that together with salads, instant miso or other cup soups she'd bought, hardly deserved to be called cooking. But at least she no longer felt an aversion towards using her kitchen. In the past, she hadn't even been able to summon the energy to make instant ramen. She'd harbored the sense that using water or heat in any way would drain her stamina, a stance that now seemed to her very grudging. The dusky pink pollock roe she removed from its polystyrene packaging gleamed wetly and, for an instant, the image of Kajii's puckered lips passed through her mind. Leaving its outer skin on, she broke up the roe with a fork and mixed it unfussily into the spaghetti. She sliced off a knob of the kelpis with a knife and perched it on top, then watched as the pale yellow solid gently began to change color, spreading out to the sides and turning golden, mingling with the fish eggs. The full, milky aroma of the butter married with the salty marine tang of the roe as the scent of the dish went rising up to her face, and she breathed it deeply into her lungs. She garnished the pasta with a scattering of shiso leaves she'd torn up with her fingers, then moved the bowl of pasta over to her cardboard box. There was a rosy-cheeked frankness about the pink of the roe, and in combination with the using butter, it looked positively carefree. Rika took up her fork and wound up the spaghetti before lifting it to her mouth. Cloaked in a coating of minuscule fish eggs and butter, the spaghetti strands sprang around on Rika's tongue as if in excitement. The dish was adequately salted, but there was a relaxed, mellow quality to its taste. What a wonderful combination pollock roe and butter made. Though she said it herself, the spaghetti had been cooked to perfection. You didn't find restaurants that served meals with this much butter, Rika thought. The more expensive the butter, the better the quality. The more that you used, the richer the taste. Rika felt the deep and generous flavor of the dish pushing into the distance her sense of irritation with herself and how gutlessly she'd behaved that day. In its upcoming issue, the Shumi Weekly's cover story was to be about a young, popular politician who was currently making great strides in his career, and the editorial desk had been pestering her for dirt on him. Rika had been covering him closely in the lead-up to the election, but from what she could make out, he was a truly good egg. And yet, she'd managed to pick through his plain-dealing behavior and root out some slight idiosyncrasies and changes in expression, which were then exaggerated so as to paint him as the very picture of arrogance. As if to banish all thoughts of the issue, Rika chewed enthusiastically on the flavorsome noodles. The bright, fresh taste of the shiso stimulated her appetite, and she found herself letting out an of satisfaction. The fact that she'd created this taste herself added to the preciousness of the moment. This was all it took, she thought, to experience a sense of satisfaction of a kind she'd not had before. To make something yourself that you wanted to eat and eat it the way you wanted, was that the very essence of gratification? Until not long ago, she'd had no idea what it was that she wanted to eat, but since she'd begun using her kitchen, she was becoming able to picture, albeit vaguely, the objects of her desires. With its prose littered with brand names and borrowed phrases, Kajii's blog exuded a refined, composed impression, but the more Rika read of it, the more she was noticing. The articles Kajii wrote about butter had a hot-bloodedness to them that differed from the rest. As she went on slurping her pasta, Rika picked up the page that she'd put in a clear plastic file. Fish roe and butter makes for a truly exquisite pairing. By adding butter to pollock roe, with its clusters of firm little orbs just like miniature egg yolks, you take away any unpleasant fishiness from the roe, instead producing a sauce with an inexplicable fullness of taste that forms a perfect coating for the carbohydrates, setting off their plumpness and texture like a dream. Perhaps best of all is the pretty pink hue of the roe, like a gorgeous spring evening. You may know by now that pink is my favorite color. The butter and rosy-colored roe combination coats each and every spaghetti strand, bringing out that delicious semolina scent and generating a flavor that feels like a wave of kindness rising up uncontrollably from inside your chest. I like to top my version with a plentiful sprinkling of chopped shiso. The blend of pink and fresh green puts me in mind of a countryside field in April. Some prefer to garnish the dish with black nori, but I've never been fond of that trend, which kills off the delightful pink shade. Your gentleman friend won't be too pleased if you get nori stuck in your teeth either. The blog post featured a camera phone photograph of 2 plates of pasta, which even the most generous reader would be hard-pressed to call a good shot. It looked as if an octogenarian, pressed by the need to message one of her grandchildren, had taken it with great trepidation, and it evoked neither the scent nor the flavor of the dish. The intricately patterned plates appeared to be made by Royal Copenhagen, but they clashed with the color of the tablecloth. Rika knew she was in no position to criticize others when it came to the presentation of meals, but there was no denying that Kajii seemed sloppy. She looked to have spent good money on both her ingredients and her tableware, her choice of which reflected her conservative-leaning taste, but it seemed safe to say that she lacked a refined aesthetic sense and was untidy by nature. Rika found herself comparing the tabletop pictured with Reiko's, where the meals were rustled up from seasonal ingredients you could get hold of anywhere, and whose unbranded tableware arranged seemingly at random still managed to look refined. Rika noted the timestamp on the photo, which read 20/04/2012. In May the following year, her first victim, 73-year-old Tadanobu Motomatsu, had died from a sleeping pill overdose at his home in front of Shoin Shrine in Setagaya, Tokyo. He was a wealthy bachelor and, like Kajii's late father, had had numerous properties to his name. His struggle with insomnia had gone on for several years, but he had never been prescribed sleeping pills by a doctor. He'd overdosed on barbiturates, which he seemed to have acquired privately. The young care worker who came in to help him had testified that he'd appeared dazed for a few days before his death. The overdose might have been an unfortunate mistake caused by the onset of dementia symptoms, and it was also possible that he had taken his own life. It had, however, been established that Motomatsu had had large sums of money squeezed from him by Kajii, that he was having doubts about her pinned on her reluctance to get married, and that he had been adopting a more confrontational approach, putting pressure on her and acting the detective as a way of establishing how serious her intentions were. Kajii had been seeing multiple men at that point in time, which made it hard to be certain, but it seemed probable that the pasta in the photograph had been made for him. Tucking into a delicious meal cooked for you by a girlfriend young enough to be your granddaughter, before falling into an eternal sleep. Was that really a death tragic enough to merit the fuss the world was kicking up about it? Even Rika's attempts to put herself in the victim's place couldn't diminish the deliciousness of the spaghetti in front of her. The way the fork kept on moving relentlessly up to her mouth struck her as a sign of her unfeelingness, and she slurped up the pasta strands with exaggerated noisiness. As it cooled, the butter formed a hard film which adhered the roe to the pasta, bringing out an added layer of umami. Just as Rika was regretting not having boiled more pasta, her phone vibrated from its place on top of the box. She had a new message. "Sorry it's so last minute, but can I stay over tonight? I lost track of time at the Nishihashi launch and missed the last train, and I need to be in early tomorrow." It was from Makoto, the first text from him in what felt like a while. His messaging her last minute in search of a bed was not a new occurrence, and she typed her reply without hesitation. "Yeah, sure. If you want anything to drink, pick it up at the convenience store. I've got a clean toothbrush here you can use. I'll get your futon and pajamas out." On a whim, Rika turned on the hob to heat a pan full of water. She brought out the second futon kept folded up at the back of her closet, along with the change of clothes that Makoto kept at her place. She finished making up the futon just as the water came to the boil. Adding salt to the pan, she let the strands of spaghetti fan out around its perimeter like the petals of a flower. She wiped down the mirror in the bathroom, set out the new toothbrush, and tidied up the room until the alarm announced that the pasta was done. Then she stirred in the pollock roe and butter as she had before, and was just sprinkling on the garnish of shiso leaves when the intercom rang. Makoto appeared at the door in a suit, then unfastened his tie as he stepped inside. When his eyes fell on the plate sitting on top of the cardboard box, he let out a startled cry. "What's this? Have you cooked?" "Yeah, I had tarako pasta for dinner, so I made you some. If you want it. It's nothing fancy. You just boil the spaghetti and stir in the rest." Makoto seemed to have drunk quite a bit, because the tip of his nose and cheeks were bright red. Since getting to the point in his career where he was in charge of editing some of the top authors, his jowls had begun to sag, most likely because of all the lavish socializing it entailed. When he'd first joined the company, the same year as Rika, both of them fresh from university, his dreamy looks had earned him the nickname, the Prince of Shimaisha, and he'd been wildly popular among the young female authors, but age had rounded his corners, and he'd become more approachable. He was humorous, with a never-ending supply of conversational topics under his belt, and never drove the person he was speaking to into a corner, which meant that Rika could talk to him for hours on end without feeling ill at ease. Makoto had been brought up in a single-mother household like Rika, and was if anything better around the house than she was. He had no interest in the sorts of power games that were so prevalent in the publishing industry, and was neither showy nor intimidating in his behavior. As a result, he won over the hearts of his colleagues and the people he worked with. Though he and Rika saw one another very occasionally, as if they only remembered from time to time that they were a couple, and in fact hadn't had sex for over a month now. Just holding hands with Makoto or having her hair stroked by him brought a warmth to Rika's heart. In a clear attempt to make himself look younger than his years, Makoto had dyed his own hair a lighter shade of brown than its natural color and wore it permed, but it matched his round, light-colored eyes well. "It's been so long since I was at your place. This smell. Does it smell funny? It must be because I haven't properly cleaned in a while. Sorry. No, that's not what I mean. It's a you smell. It's comforting." With that, Makoto turned his back to her and changed into the clothes she'd laid out for him. Looking at the soft skin of his bare shoulders, flushed with the alcohol, she was taken by the urge to reach out and touch it. In the early days of their friendship, she'd seen Makoto as an ally to whom she could talk about anything, but the first time she'd held him, she'd felt the heat of his body loosening a deep part of her which had been stiff with tension. He'd told her, that first time, that he liked the way she smelled. They'd been friends for so long that it had made becoming lovers feel a little ticklish, and they both avoided overt displays of sentimentality, but she did wish they had more of the kind of time they'd had when they first started dating, when they could sit and simply wallow in one another's smell and body temperature. Back then, going into work unslept had not been the trial it was now, and they'd spent whole nights lying awake embracing. In any case, this was the longest relationship she'd had with a man. Makoto hung his suit on a clothes hanger and sprayed it with anti-crease spray before finally sitting down at the table, legs crossed. He looked like a student, she thought. She found herself casting glances at his mouth as he began to slurp the pasta. Thinking about it, she realized this was the first time she'd ever cooked for him. "Is it okay?" "Yeah, of course, it's good. Not that I'd have expected any less." Something about the way he was moving the pasta to his mouth seemed awkward to her. He chewed in silence. Knowing that he was partial to noodles after drinking, she'd been expecting more of a reaction, and she felt disappointed. Having polished off the spaghetti in no time at all, Makoto put his hands together in a gesture of thanks, then turned to look at her. "Thank you. That was really good. But it took me by surprise. Isn't this the first time you've cooked for me?" "Is it?" she said, carrying his empty plate to the sink and rinsing it off. She was on the verge of telling him that it was all part of her professional research, then thought better of it. Makoto might have been her boyfriend, but he was also in the same industry. You never knew how things got leaked. Swearing him to secrecy would make it seem as if she didn't trust him. She didn't want to have her exclusive coverage of Kajii thwarted by anyone. Poking his head out of the bathroom as he brushed his teeth assiduously, Makoto went on, his words just about comprehensible. "You know that you don't need to make an effort when I come over, right? I don't need you to act all domestic or anything. I just wanted to see you. If I'm hungry, I'll pick up food for myself. You must be so tired with all the end-of-year work." "Domestic? Me?" Repeating the word she found impossible to connect with herself, Rika stared ahead in bewilderment, before murmuring, "Oh, I get it," and sitting down on the bed. Her actions had been misconstrued, she saw now. Feeling as if whatever she said would only deepen the misunderstanding, she felt incapable of speaking at all. There was a loud gargling sound, then a damp-faced Makoto came into the room smelling of peppermint. "I know you're my girlfriend, but I don't need you to take care of me in any practical sense, you know? I hate the idea that that burden falls on you when you're working just as hard as me. I saw what my mother had to go through." He kissed her on the cheek and lay down on the futon she'd made up for him, rolling heavily onto his side. "Night," he mumbled, and turned out the light, so Rika lay down on her own futon alongside his. He reached out his hand towards hers and held it, but his grip grew slack almost immediately. Why was it, she wondered as she pulled up the blanket, that a silly little interaction could bug her this much? Makoto hadn't said anything out of line. He cared about her and understood her better than anybody. Had their future as a couple grown uncertain because he'd rejected the idea of her cooking for him? No, that wasn't it. She couldn't clearly see herself marrying Makoto anyway, and she was sickened to the core by the idea that housework must be a woman's job. The word domestic made her picture her mother, cowed and fearful around her late father, breaking down in tears after he picked endless holes in the meals she'd cooked. Why, though, had Makoto had to take it that way? All she'd done was cook him a plate of pasta on a whim. Lying in the darkness, replaying each of her actions in a bid to locate the problematic component, Rika felt herself growing ever more awake. Next to her, Makoto was snoring in a way that sounded too agonizing, too earth-splitting for someone of his age. The northerly wind coming off the Iase River slipped effortlessly through the fabric of her coat, seeming to take hold of her by her very bones and rattle her around. Her frozen fingertip once again sprouted a small hangnail. This was Rika's third visit to the Tokyo detention house this month. As she emerged from the visitor's exit, pulling the lapels of her coat tightly about her, her eyes fell on a sign across the road reading Masudia. There was a nostalgic look about its small, weathered wooden facade, which put Rika in mind of the regulation stationery shop outside the entrance to her primary school. This must be where you could buy items to give to people in the detention house, she figured. The shop next door seemed to fulfill the same function, but its shutters were down. Glancing at her watch, Rika saw it was just before 4. She had ample time before her next meeting. Before she knew it, she was making her way across the road. Again there were fresh flowers laid beside the guardrail, blowing in the wind. Today, once again, Kajii had refused to see her. Maybe, Rika mused, Kajii's recent crankiness wasn't down to her. Next week was Christmas, after all. Rika was beginning to understand that for someone with tastes as extravagant as Kajii's, being barred from going out during this season, being limited to the foods on a menu determined by others, was a profoundly unfortunate turn of events. The final update to Kajii's blog was dated from the day before her arrest, November 28th of the year before last, not long now until Christmas. I adore this time of the year, when the outside world is at its most captivating. This year I'm throwing caution to the wind and cooking a succulent turkey stuffed with chestnuts and rice, complete with a sumptuous honey-rich gravy, just as we learned in cooking class. They'll be taking orders for Christmas cakes in no time, too. I'm currently debating which to plump for. No, scrap that, I've decided. Such was the buoyant note on which the blog concluded. This would be the third winter Kajii had spent in the detention house, Rika calculated. Her patience must be reaching its limits. The interior of Masudia was lined with shelves made of the same aged wood as the shop's exterior, crowded with stationery, towels and underwear, bags of sweets, weekly magazines, and all kinds of other items. The brands of confectionery on sale were extremely old-fashioned. Rika remembered seeing them in the supermarket as a girl, but was astonished to discover they were still being produced. Walking around convenience stores, where the newest goods were deliberately placed in the customer's line of sight, Rika would frequently feel twinges of temptation, but here she felt a surprising absence of any urge to buy anything. Still, the only food items that the detention house permitted to be brought inside were those bought either from here or the shop next door, which was currently shut. The customer would inform the cashier of the name of the prisoner they wished to send the items to, and the shop would deliver the purchased goods to the inmate in question. The gray-haired woman behind the counter, whom Rika assumed must be the owner, was glaring at her. Rika didn't want the woman to think that she was just idly browsing. She knew she had to decide on something. Calm down, she entreated herself. Kajii would know that only food from the designated shops could be sent in. Besides, didn't having such a limited range of options make things easier? The family pack of assorted cakes in the glass case was the kind she had shared with her classmates during middle school parties. The green Sanyo cans arranged in a row on the shelf caught her eye. It was a long time since she'd seen canned fruit. Back in middle school, whenever she caught a cold, her mother would place a can of peaches in the fridge for her before setting out to work. She didn't know whether Kajii had access to a refrigerator, but those canned peaches that slipped so smoothly down the throat seemed like something that she might enjoy. Then there were chestnut manju, Canton fruit jelly, cigar-shaped sweets made of wheat gluten, castella cakes stuffed with sweet bean paste. Among the rows of Japanese sweets in austerely designed bags made by brands she'd never heard of, the boxes of Morinaga cookies struck her as the most appealing. There were 3 types: Marie, Moonlight, and Choice. Which to go for? She'd probably sampled all 3 at some point, but couldn't recall how they tasted. She probably should have checked their ingredients or descriptions, but they were kept in the glass case, and she was reluctant to ask the stern-faced woman to get them out and show them to her. After some deliberating, Rika made her selection. "I'd like to have a can of peaches and a box of Choice sent to the detention house." Of the 3, the Choice box was the only one whose illustration featured butter. The shop woman clicked the beads on her abacus, then held out a piece of paper and a ballpoint pen to Rika. In the prisoner's name box, Rika wrote in Manako Kajii's name, and then filled in the other required information. The refrigerated case caught her eye, and on impulse she asked the woman, "You don't stock butter, do you?" "We used to, but there's a supply shortage at the moment," the woman replied brusquely. Rika paid up and left the shop. Even if there had been butter, it would doubtless have been either the bog-standard Snow brand or else a cheap unbranded kind. Nevertheless, Rika felt that was the thing that would have most pleased Kajii to receive. She hoped that by the next time she came, it would be back in stock. Rika hailed a cab to IA Station, where she caught the Chiyoda line to Hibiya. Stepping off the train, she headed straight for the bathrooms. Standing in front of the mirror, she took out her makeup removal sheets and vigorously wiped her face clean. She balled up the wet wipe, now streaked with black and beige, and threw it in the bin under the sink. A young woman emerged from one of the cubicles and came to stand alongside Rika at the sinks. She applied a coat of pink lipstick and then flashed a smile at herself in the mirror. Rika watched the girl leave with a feeling of goodwill in her chest. With deliberate roughness of touch, Rika rubbed a thick coat of Nivea cream into her bare skin. She removed her contact lenses and replaced them with glasses and pulled back her hair tightly with an elastic band. She needed to get rid of all traces of softness and sweetness about her before joining the man she was about to meet. The sight of the person in the mirror before her, tall and wiry and of indeterminate gender, gave her a sense of deep satisfaction. The bluish-white skin, suggesting exhaustion, worked well too. Yesterday, a succession of things had not gone to plan at work, and she had only managed to sleep for 3 hours. Painfully aware of her lack of exercise, Rika decided, when she emerged above ground, to walk the short distance to Shimbashi along the railway tracks. It was still early for people to be heading home from work, and yet Yurakucho at dusk was spilling over with people in suits. From here and there she heard the sound of dry coughing and noticed several people whose eyes stood out because their faces were half covered by masks. "I need to get my flu vaccine," Rika thought to herself. The cold, dry wind slapped against her exposed, moist skin. Above her head, Yamanote and Kihin, Tohoku Line trains went slipping by one after another. Rika knew that in her industry there were women who used their sex to their advantage. She'd heard rumors of female journalists who entered into physical relationships with their sources. Yet personal relationships between men and women was not a domain in which others would intervene. It was up to the individual how they comported themselves, and in this world, where the quality of the story was everything, it would have been seen as crass to find fault with and lambast such methods. The women in question weren't open about what they were doing, and nobody could prove that it was going on. To build a unique relationship that defied categorization, and to then allow that relationship to morph until it just about justified itself. Of course, Rika hadn't spoken with any of the people whom the rumors were about, but she felt sure that inside. This was how they articulated what they were doing, resolute in their determination to feel no compunction about their actions. In other words, even the high-earning and independent women in the media industry engaged in an alternative form of prostitution to get their hands on the hot tip-offs. And while Rika herself didn't employ her femininity to win over bureaucrats and police officers, she couldn't, hand on her heart, swear that she'd never behaved flirtatiously. She'd recently discovered that a female journalist from a rival newspaper, who'd landed several major political scoops and whom Rika secretly admired, had in fact been sleeping with a Diet member for a long time, and that all her information came from him, and her disappointment was still fresh. Not knowing who to blame, she looked up at the sunset sky, boxed in by buildings. This was why a woman like Manako Kajii, a woman who didn't hide the fact that she used her sexuality as a weapon, was met with such fierce scorn and even a kind of terror. In a statement in court, Kajii had asserted that her body had a special value, that she granted her lovers a fantastic experience, and that as such, it stood to reason she'd be rewarded financially. With no way of verifying the truth of her claims about the experience she and her body afforded, those listening to her found their rational faculties shutting down. The only response possible was to nod and say, "Really, is that so?" Trying to remember the woman who'd stood beside her at the sinks in the public toilet, Rika noticed that her features had already faded in her memory. That made sense, for it wasn't the girl's face that had drawn her attention, so much as the sense of taking good care of herself that she gave off. Since getting married, Reiko had begun exuding a similar kind of aura. For what was about to take place, Rika told herself now, she had no need for that soft-edged, fragrant presence. She and her source met once a month in an izakaya with private rooms under the railway girders of Shimbashi Station. The izakaya was a ramshackle, sepia-toned place where every object looked like it had been simmered in mirin. They met on the third Thursday of the month at 5 p.m., before it got busy. They would be finished in an hour and a half and subsequently returned to work. Yes, they had a drink or two, but it hardly qualified as drinking together. From the kitchen at the back, Rika could hear the sizzle of old oil boiling and smell it too. The owner of the place, who must have been in his 70s, gave her a drawn-out cry of welcome, "Irashai." He indicated to the room furthest from the kitchen, shielded by a screen, its 2 seats sunk into the floor. The giving up smoking didn't last long, I see. Rika let out a dry cackle as she sat herself down heavily opposite the suited man smoking a highlight cigarette and threw her bag on top of the tatami. With a moist hand towel on the table, she wiped her brow and cheeks. The rules for their rendezvous were set. They didn't pour one another's drinks or serve one another food, didn't attempt to show respect for the other as one was obliged to do in other forms of professional entertaining, and spoke at length and as one-sidedly as they wanted about whatever they wanted to. When he was appearing on television as a commentator, Yoshinori Shinoi had a lot to say, but when you encountered him in real life, he was taciturn. Sometimes Rika would spend their whole time together complaining, at which times he would display neither great interest nor irritation in response, but simply nod and make the appropriate noises, drinking at his own pace. On screen, he had a glint in his eye and appeared sturdily built, but the person sitting in front of her now was a slender, unassuming middle-aged man, his hair liberally streaked with gray. The way he jiggled his long arms and legs and hunched his tall back gave him an air of an adolescent boy. She noticed his shirt was slightly creased, but it didn't look dirty. "I never said I'd given up. Just that I'd succeeded in cutting down," he said quietly. Stubbing out the cigarette he'd begun in the ashtray, he raised his steamed-up glass to his mouth. "I'm guessing that with all the TV work you've had even less time for sleep than usual." "Wow, quite the classic old man selection you've got there." Spread out on the table in front of Shinoi, alongside his shoshi with hot water, was an array of traditional izakaya dishes: braised burdock root, edamame, atka mackerel, and tofu simmered in dashi. When she'd first started meeting Shinoi, his order had always been beer and deep-fried chicken, and the change made her realize that he'd started taking care of his health. Rika ordered a flask of hot sake, along with buttered sweet corn and grilled spicy pollock roe. She tucked into the appetizer that the server brought her along with her sake flask and cup, using her chopsticks to lift up the slimy contents of the small dish with evident distaste. "As usual, I've no idea what this is. Some kind of seafood? Or is it konyaka?" However many times she visited this place, she never got to the bottom of what exactly was in the sweet and sour gunk that they'd serve just a mouthful of as the obligatory appetizer. If the food here wasn't offensively bad, it wasn't particularly good either. The draw of the place, for her and for Shinoi, lay mostly in its lack of customers. I had something sent to one of the inmates at Tokyo Detention House for the first time today: cookies and canned peaches. A female inmate. I just figured that she must feel deprived at this time of year, not being able to eat cake and fried chicken like everyone else in Japan. Rika hadn't yet told Shinoi about Manako Kajii, but she felt close to confiding in him now. He was the only person she could talk to about work matters without concealing anything. I don't know, I hear the food in Kosuge is pretty good. You have 3 meals a day cooked for you by prisoners with chef's licenses. I've even heard talk of people who commit crimes just to get a place there. Are you serious? Don't people call prison food rank rice? I think that's probably an outmoded perception from back in the days when people thought anything other than white rice was an insult to the taste buds. The rice they serve in the detention house is mixed with various types of grains. I guess people took umbrage with that. Nowadays, all of that stuff, barley and millet and what have you, has undergone a reappraisal and is seen as very healthy. My guess is that they eat far better than you or I do. You're right, that sounds a lot healthier and more nutritious than my diet. I never cook, and I get all my meals from the convenience store. For some reason, Rika felt loath to mention to Shinoi that she'd been using her kitchen of late. I'll see if I can get my hands on the latest special occasions menu for the detention house. Shinoi jotted something down in his battered brown leather notepad. Whenever I see this guy, he looks tired, Rika thought, observing him surreptitiously from across her sake cup. His skin had a grayish hue, and the whites of his eyes were clouded. Maybe she was not so different from him, but Shinoi's tiredness seemed to be even deeper in his body, a kind of resignation that couldn't be erased. She'd caught wind of a rumor that he'd been divorced for years, but he barely ever spoke about his private life, and she didn't know whether or not it was true. Now she said, her tone deliberately blunt, after my parents divorced, my dad started leading an unhealthy lifestyle. Eventually, he became an alcoholic, more or less, and one day he keeled over and died, all alone in his flat. You should be careful, you know. He was about your age, I think. How old are you now? 48. And please don't come at me with that kind of ominous stuff. My diet might be a bit rough around the edges, but I have health checks pretty regularly. I've started jogging in the mornings around the Imperial Palace, and I buy a carton of vegetable juice whenever I catch sight of one in the station. Perhaps he was offended by her words, because for once Shinoi took a hand in steering the conversation. There was no denying that he looked exhausted, but there was nothing about him that suggested that things had got out of hand. He didn't bring his frustrations or his bad physical condition into the conversation, either. She imagined that he had the strength and the wisdom it took to recuperate. It was for that reason that he was easy to be around. That was a feature he shared with Makoto, in fact. When it came to members of the opposite sex, Rika got along well with these types who didn't require women to play hostess or manager. She was fairly sure that Shinoi felt similarly about their connection. It was because they got along that he made the time to see her. He took care of Rika just like he would a male peer or colleague younger than him. I guess for someone of your age, you're on the careful side. It's weird, isn't it? Why is it that with nobody to watch over them, men can't stop themselves from falling into disrepair? And that disrepair is then looked upon kindly and excused by the world, seen not as a failure of personal responsibility, but something poignant and tragic. Recently, the disorderly behavior of a former sportsman in his 50s, who had given up his career after being suspected of involvement with criminal gangs, had been making the news. After his wife of many years had left him and taken their children with her, he had gone off the rails and had been seen out late at night on several occasions, drunkenly losing his cool. People suspected he was dabbling with drugs as well. To one journalist who'd interacted with him directly, he'd apparently said, "Eating alone is so lonely, and the food tastes terrible, so I end up going out. I don't know how to cook rice by myself. Shit, I don't even know where the salt's kept. What did I do wrong to have ended up with such a miserable life? I want my family back." After this lamentation, he'd sent a public message to his sons, whom the family court had ruled he could no longer see, entitled From Dad. The men's weekly magazines unanimously covered the story as a hero's tragic fall from grace, writing sympathetic articles portraying the occurrence as something that could happen to anyone. Rika couldn't feel the slightest bit sorry for him, and not because he was a man who had for years been dogged by shady rumors, whose behavior tended towards emotional blackmail, and who had caused his wife and children much suffering by having an affair. No, what bothered her was that he didn't even think to make the effort to improve his eating habits by himself. He was still of an age where he had no trouble getting around, and although on paper he might have been unemployed, he was still gifted with more money and time than the regular person, not to mention plentiful contacts and information sources. These days you could even find healthy choices at convenience stores and diners and late-night restaurants. Even someone incapable of cooking could still, by applying themselves just a little, live a passably healthy lifestyle. Perhaps his reckless, self-destructive bent was a curse directed at the fans who'd deserted him, at the media who'd built him up then abandoned him, and above all at his wife and sons, who'd walked out on him and started afresh. It was as if he were saying, "May this image of how low I've sunk brand itself into your minds, because it's all your fault." The patterns of behavior were so familiar. Choosing to kick up a stink until help was proffered him, instead of explicitly asking for it. Stubbornly refusing to change his way of living even a fraction. Insisting that family was the most important thing to him, while broadcasting to the world that his wife had left him to die. Couldn't he simply go about rebuilding his life, and if he failed and died in the process, then so much the better? But wasn't the attitude of this man the same, to a greater or a lesser extent, as the men that Kajii had killed? The things those men had said while they were alive, and the testimony of their family and friends, came filtering back to Rika now, one after another. "I'm scared of getting old alone. Before, my lifestyle was getting progressively less healthy. I wanted a woman to make me meals and take care of me. I didn't care who it was. I do feel suspicious of her. It's occurred to me that I might be being conned. My family's told me time and time again to break up with her, but I don't care. Even if it means cutting ties with my family, I'm choosing to be with her." That woman found the cracks in the hearts of those poor victims who were living miserable, lonely lives, and went worming her way in. Men are inept creatures. They can't build a life for themselves without the support and kindness of a woman. There are things that every woman can learn from Manako Kajii. There's not a man in the world who can't be won over by a kind female presence who knows how to cook. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach, after all. Whichever aspect of it you considered, Rika thought, the Kajii case was tinged by misogyny and the excessive self-pity felt by lonely men. Was thinking that way tantamount to victim-blaming, though? Usually, she loathed the all-too-common take that people were responsible for their own destinies. Perhaps I'm lacking in compassion because I'm still physically fit and capable of working, Rika thought to herself, trying to adopt an even stance on the matter. After the divorce, Rika's mother had raised her single-handedly, and Rika was aware that she was perhaps overly aligned with her mother's perspective. But it was possible that she herself would spend her old age alone, neglecting to take good care of herself. She might even have the wool pulled over her eyes by a younger man and have everything stolen from her. But if it were me, she thought, I wouldn't go down the road to self-destruction solely because I was lonely. I'm pretty certain that I'd guard my savings with my life, too, and be wary of any propositions that came my way that sounded too good to be true. Among the people she was least likely to place her trust in were significantly younger unemployed men whom she'd met on the internet and asked for money from their first meeting. Even if she were on the verge of being conned, she was confident that Reiko, who by then would be just as old as she was, would notice and step in to warn her. Even if Reiko were to die before her and she had nobody to talk to, then surely, so long as she had internet access, she'd find an online community of old people in the neighborhood and join their circle. Or was she supposed to chalk up the fact that she was able to think all this through in a matter-of-fact way, not to mention her adaptability and her communication skills, to her being a woman? After all, Two of Kajii's three victims had been of an age that still barely merited terming elderly and had plenty of money. But no, she was better off not thinking about this anymore. A sense of foreboding loomed over her like a heavy cloud. In a bid to prevent the cloud from casting a shadow over their meeting, Rika took a gulp of sake. Her eyes on the sizzling hot plate with the buttered corn that had been brought to the table, she said, "I wanted to ask you. Do you know the book The Story of Little Babaji? I was reading it the other day at the house of a married friend of mine." "I do." "The one where the tigers turn into butter." "That's the one." "Do you feel sorry for the tigers? Do you think Babaji's family are cruel?" "It's just natural selection, isn't it? That's the way things work. Nobody's in the wrong. The tigers need to eat to stay alive." Shinoi strung his thoughts together as he de-shelled his edamame. The skin on his hands was dark and his middle fingers were very long. Babaji responded to the situation the only way he could, and the tigers went and killed themselves, no? And when the father brought the butter home to eat, he didn't know what it was, didn't know it came from a bunch of dead tigers. That's how order is preserved in the natural world, across various ecosystems, by the ones who've just so happened to make it through by getting their own way. I know it can seem cruel. We've come to use the word evolution as though it were a resolutely positive thing, but all it means is that the species best adapted for a particular environment survive, and the others die out. Like how people often say that our print media here in Japan will gradually be driven out by the digital forms, like you see happening in America. That can hardly be called progress, can it? Shinoi fell silent, and his words turned round and round in Rika's head. When he continued, it was in the same tone as before. "Do you know the members club Lavi and Ginza? The owner was seen coming out of a maternity clinic in Kyoto that all the celebrities go to." Choosing her words carefully, Rika decided to venture inside the small jungle that had cropped up in front of her. "Oh, I've heard rumors about her. Is she still single? She's the famously beautiful one, right? She used to be a model, and she's apparently still quite something." "In that case, I imagine her customers are a glamorous bunch." She caught sight of a gentle flicker at the back of Shinoi's irises. "There's the former pop star Tomomi Otani and Toyohashi, the baseball player." And then, as Shinoi pronounced the name of the politician upon whom so many hopes were pinned at the next elections, the corner of his mouth curled unmistakably. Rika felt the floor sway a little beneath her. "Thank you." To this day, Shinoi had never given her a clear-cut tip-off. Instead, in a tone that suggested he was relating the kind of gossip known to everyone, he would drop into conversation nuggets that lay peripheral to the heart of the story in question. This was why she couldn't tell anybody about their relationship. They'd met 2 years previously at the magazine department's end-of-year party, when he'd still been writing articles for them and had ended up sitting next to one another by chance. She'd been struck by his reserved persona, which seemed to indicate a distaste for rowdiness, very different to how he came across in the media. The next time they'd run into one another was outside the house of a Diet member. It had been raining. Spurred by her desire for information about the politician in question, she'd invited him for a drink, and he'd brought her to this place as somewhere close by where they could shelter from the rain. It was from that point in time that Rika's run of scoops had begun. I didn't say a thing. For the first time that day, Shinoi smiled a little. His eyes crinkled up to nothing, and a cluster of small lines formed around his mouth. It was an intimate smile that made the room feel smaller. It reminded Rika that they were alone together. There were certain things that newspapers and national news channels couldn't report on: politicians' affairs, information about the victims of crimes, the personal lives of normal citizens who'd found themselves in the limelight. People like Shinoi felt that they didn't want to let the information they'd happened to get hold of go to waste, even if they themselves couldn't use it. Passing it along to a new journalist at a weekly magazine was perhaps a perfectly natural thing to do, not dissimilar to serving the leftovers of yesterday's dinner to a pet. But why me? Rika was often left asking herself. The question unsettled her. She didn't have anything to offer Shinoi in return. Several times, she imagined herself through his eyes. There was nothing about her that would rouse his interest in her as a woman. He had never tried to steer things down that route, and she'd never even had a premonition that such a thing might happen. "Can I have one?" She scrounged a cigarette from him. His lighter was running out, so Rika called to the middle-aged waitress with a disinterested manner and asked her to bring the lighter from the kitchen. Putting the dry cigarette to her lips, she held up the gas lighter that looked a lot like a pistol and lit it. At the sight of this, which she fancied looked like something from a hard-boiled detective movie, Shinoi gave a wry smile. Rika didn't usually smoke and had to make an effort to make sure she didn't cough with the first drag. She found Shinoi's look of incredulous amusement deeply comforting. I just picked up something that he tossed away in front of me, that's all it is. No different to Babaji's dad bringing home the butter he'd found in the jungle. While it was still warm, the buttered corn tasted aromatic and flavorsome, but as it cooled, an acridity began to emerge. They must have been using margarine, she thought. Dear Ms. Machida, it's been a while since we've been in touch. Thank you for the canned peaches and biscuits that you kindly sent me. Choice are my favorite Morinaga biscuits. I'm aware that Moonlight are the more popular selection, but both they and Marie are made with margarine. Christmas is fast approaching. The year before last, I was planning on ordering a Christmas cake from West. Regrettably, I never got to eat it. Well-made buttercream is truly delicious, but unfortunately it's so hard to come by of late. Would you be so good as to eat the cake on my behalf? If you were to eat the real thing and tell me your impressions immediately afterwards, we might have ourselves some fun. Manako Kajii. Rika found the letter waiting on her desk after coming back from her meeting with Shinoi. It was now the following day. After reading the letter twice through, Rika had picked up her phone and pressed the phone number listed on the West homepage. After a few rings, a softly spoken woman whose manner reminded Rika of a school prefect picked up. I'm terribly sorry, but our reservation period for Christmas cakes runs only from the 1st to the 20th of December. This year we received an unprecedented number of reservations. I'm terribly sorry. Her words came out smoothly enough that Rika could tell she'd repeated this message many times, but still avoided sounding robotic. Rika put down the phone. Wondering to herself whether the unprecedented popularity had something to do with the butter shortage, she booted up the computer on her desk. A search for the term West Christmas cake yielded numerous articles describing its taste, from personal blogs to the sites of well-known food writers. The writers were united in their lavish praise for its classic, refined flavor. Yet Rika knew that borrowing another's words wouldn't do. She couldn't fall into the trap of thinking that she understood simply because she'd read about it. Unless she could articulate in her own words something she'd experienced with her own tongue, there was no point. Manako Kajii would see through her lies immediately. I'm being tested, she thought to herself. Rika racked her brains for any contacts that might be of help: bureaucrats, police officers, celebrities, sports journalists. But no, none of them had anything to do with cakes. She was starting to think half in earnest about standing outside the shop and paying someone who'd come to collect theirs to hand it over to her. Just then her eyes fell on the various weekly magazines in the rack by the desk. The Shumi Weekly ranked third in the industry. She recalled what Shinoi had been saying about natural selection. Everyone thought of this as an age where magazines didn't sell, but you could be sure that everyone in the industry passed their eyes over them without fail every week. You could even go as far as to say that the people reading the magazines the most avidly, the ones dropping the most money on them, were fellow media employees. She found herself saying aloud. She picked up her phone. Reiko answered almost immediately. This is unlike you to call at this time. Aren't you at work? What's up? From the sound of running water in the background, she guessed that Reiko was preparing dinner. Do you know if Ryosuke's company buys the cakes made by rival companies for research? Of course. Apparently on Christmas, Valentine's Day, and White Day they buy all the products made by the other companies, spread them out in a line in a meeting room, and photograph and taste them. Sometimes if there's cake left over from one of the famous brands, he'll sneak some out and bring it so I get to taste it too. Rika briefly outlined her situation and Reiko understood right away. A West Christmas cake. Okay, got it. It's a pretty classic choice, so I can't imagine they won't have one. I'll ask. Leave it with me. There was a bounce to Reiko's tone now, and Rika could sense her friend's enthusiasm for this new mission she'd been entrusted with. Reiko excelled at whatever she turned a hand to and enjoyed helping others out. Being tasked only with housework every day offered little outlet for those qualities, though, and it seemed as if she'd been waiting for just this kind of opportunity. Thank you so much, I mean it. I know I said this in my text, but it was entirely thanks to your advice that Kajii opened up to me in the first place. I owe everything to you. Barely any time had elapsed between putting down the phone to Reiko and receiving a message from Ryosuke. Now it was Christmas Eve, and Rika had come to the Tokyo headquarters of Ryosuke's confectionery company, not far from Gamei Station. When she reached the top of the subway stairs, she saw fine snow falling on Route 246. The office building contained a company-run cafe on the ground floor, and Rika spotted Ryosuke through the glass, talking to a woman she assumed was the owner. The inside of the cafe was adorned with red and green decorations and a Christmas tree with twinkling lights, and she could see a stylish couple tucking into identical slices of cake. The Ryosuke who lifted a hand to her in greeting struck her as somewhat off-color, brimming with less youthful vitality than usual. Even the trademark pink tint to his cheeks was gone. She broached the topic hesitantly, thanking him for responding to such an audacious request, and he smiled feebly. Every Christmas, everyone working at headquarters gets sent out to the factories to work on the cake decorating lines. We do that all night, and then come morning, trot off to the city center department stores to do research, without any sleep at all. I know a lot of people think that working in a confectionery company sounds like a dream job, but the truth is that the people working in firms like ours are all well-built, sporty types. You have to be, otherwise you wouldn't last a minute. At least when you finally get home you'll be eating Christmas dinner with Reiko. That's true, Ryosuke said, smiling and looking a little bashful, before leading Rika to the employee lift at the back of the lobby. The small enclosed space smelled of chilled fresh cream. To repay the favor, I'd like to do a feature on your company at some point. Our readers love all that kind of stuff, insider secrets about product development, and the backstories to the marketing campaigns and stuff. What I'd love to say right now is, there's no need to do anything in return, you're my wife's best friend. But the truth is, that'd be much appreciated. We can't even scrape together an advertising budget at the moment, and it'd be great to be featured in a magazine with a readership as wide as yours. When times get tight, confectionery is one of the first luxuries people scrimp on. These days, when you can buy decent cakes in any convenience store, it's tough for middle-grade manufacturers like ours. It struck Rika acutely now how true luxury when it came to food demanded determination and energy, even more than it did money. You had to keep abreast of which products were in season, search out a bevy of go-to shops, and be forever researching new products and trends. You had to be perpetually asking your body, calmly, what it was craving at that particular time. In Kajii, that energy was so strong you could have termed it an obsession, the flame that kept her alive. However much time and money Rika were to have, she would never be that way. The lift reached the 3rd floor. Ryosuke opened the door to the meeting room, and Rika was greeted by a fresh, fruity scent. The long table positioned centrally in the empty room was lined from one end to the other with Christmas cakes created by all of Japan's most famous confectionery companies. It made for quite a sight. They've already been photographed, so it's fine to tuck in. The product innovation bunch are coming for a tasting session later, so I'd rather you didn't polish off the whole thing, but one slice shouldn't be a problem. With a smile, Ryosuke pointed her to cake number 4. The buttercream creation was different to the cakes around it. Their surfaces were crowded with strawberries, ivy, and edible sugar decorations. Aside from the wreaths and candles rendered in cream on its white top, the only decorations here were 3 flame-shaped biscuits and a sprinkling of ground pistachios and walnuts. Its surface was as smooth as a snow cape, but Rika could tell that innumerable glistening particles of high-quality animal fat lay cloistered away inside. Like the stars, which are still twinkling up in the daytime sky though we cannot see them, Rika thought. I have to say there's something quite compelling about doing away with all the strawberries and Santas and message plates and so on, and aiming to win the battle on the strength of their buttercream and sponge alone. West always go to town on their ingredients, fully aware it'll leave them in the red. Wow. I've only ever heard of them before for their leaf pie biscuits. Saying this, Rika pictured the leaf-shaped pastry biscuits in their white box that someone had left in the corner of the break room at work. The vast proportion of the employees at her company were men, and yet those biscuits had vanished in no time at all. Rika had been slow in making a move and missed her chance. They say that the West Cafe in Meguro that shut 2 years ago never made a profit, despite being always full. That's pretty amazing to think about. You have to respect them. Meguro lay within walking distance of Fudome, where Kajii had lived. The cafe had to have been one of her favorite places. If that was the case, Rika thought, it was likely that she'd been aiming to pick up her West Christmas cake from there. With practiced gestures, Ryosuke cut into the cake, transferred a slice onto a plate, and held it out to Rika, along with a plastic fork. Thanking him, Rika broke into the slice. She could sense its density beneath the fork's prongs. Its graceful white and light yellow cross-section brought a smile to her face. This is actually the first time I've ever tried buttercream. No doubt because it had been refrigerated until very recently, the cream retained a certain firmness. As it melted under the heat of her tongue, the sweet butter expanded lusciously, rousing all the cells across her body capable of apprehending its rich goodness. The dense sponge saturated with the rich, weighty aroma of milk made her think that she would never again be satisfied by fluffy shortcake with its sweet and sour tang. True taste came with a high price tag and a high calorie count to match. You had to traverse mountains to come by it. Rika shut her eyes and let the memory imprint itself onto her tongue. Somewhere in the distance, Rika could hear Ryosuke's voice teasing her about how serious she looked. When she stepped out of the office, the snow was still falling. Buying an umbrella seemed too much effort, and her coat grew dusted in snow as she walked at a clip towards Omotesando Station and took the Chiyoda line to Ie Station. She caught a cab to Tokyo Detention House and filled in the usual visitor's application form. She passed through the metal detectors, walked down the long corridor, and then took the lift to the specified floor. Standing in front of the numbered door, Rika found her chest ablaze with conviction that today she would get to see Kajii. After a little while, Kajii appeared with a look of great poise, accompanied by a male prison officer. It was 3 weeks since Rika had last seen her. Her first thought was that Kajii looked prettier than the last time. Her skin seemed even paler and smoother than before. Stained a palish pink shade, her cheeks and eyelids appeared somewhat swollen, as though she'd been crying, but that look wasn't without allure. She wore a white sweater above a long checked skirt, an outmoded sort of outfit, which left the impression that its wearer was ill-adapted to the times she was living in. But it was also a sophisticated look and suited Kajii's face. What's more, it was ideally suited for Christmas Eve. Kajii was, in her own way, attempting to enjoy her life in the detention house. Rika recalled Shinoi's mention of natural selection. She had the sense that come war, come famine, this woman would find a way of surviving. It's good to see you. I just ate some of the West Christmas cake you mentioned, so I came to thank you for telling me about it and share my thoughts. Kajii didn't smile. Her sleepy-looking eyes seemed a little out of focus. Partly thanks to the bobbly white sweater that she was wearing, there was something humorously snowman-like about her appearance. Rika didn't feel afraid of her today. The taste of the cake still lingered on her tongue. Fighting back her impulse to rush ahead, she parted her lips, still oily with the grease of the butter. A simple wreath design with candles in the middle. The intricate cream piping looked like a sculpture. Aside from the sprinkling of ground nuts and the biscuits in the shape of candle flames, a total absence of decoration. I'm no expert when it comes to confectionery, but I understand that unsalted butter is used as standard in baking. By contrast, the West buttercream uses salted butter. That salinity really brings out the overall sweetness of the cake, adding depth to its richness. The sponge has a satisfying density to it, declaring itself roughly on the tongue, scented like eggs and flour. The Christmas cakes I've eaten up until now have all been shortcakes, and it's always seemed to me that the delicate, fluffy whipped cream and the sweet sourness of the strawberries obliterate the aroma and the texture of the sponge. You talked previously about the sensation of falling that you get from eating butter. The West Christmas cake is. One day, Rika thought to herself, I'm going to be writing my own articles. I'm not the sort of person to reach for trite phrases. Desperately, she groped for the right words to command Kajii's attention. She wasn't prepared to lose out to Kajii's speech about rice with butter and soy sauce. Suddenly, the image of the powder snow she'd encountered outside Gamey came back to her, those crystal flakes whirling and dancing down from the gray sky. A fall that never ends, spinning and spiraling as if waltzing as you plummet ceaselessly down. Those perfectly black eyes looked at her straight on, taking her in. Even through the acrylic screen, Rika could tell that Kajii's lips had grown moist. Her neck heaved up and down. She's hungry, Rika realized instinctively. Rika's description of the cake, her explanation of the sensation of eating it, had roused desire in Kajii. Rika couldn't remember the last time that she'd induced desire in anybody. A memory surfaced. Back when she'd been at an all-girls school, a classmate had begged Rika, tearfully, to let her kiss her. Please, just once, she'd entreated. Rika had politely refused, fighting back her surprise. When Rika had re-encountered the girl many years later at a class reunion, she had transformed into a cheerful, good-natured woman, married with 2 children, and had said nonchalantly to Rika, I was so desperate back then to fall in love. But there were no boys around, and since you were the most boyishly handsome person in sight, I had no choice but to become obsessed with you. I went a bit funny in the head. It was clear she was attempting to write the whole thing off as an amusing anecdote from the past, but Rika could remember the episode with an almost cruel level of detail. There was no doubting it. In that moment, the girl had desired Rika. Her eyes and her lips had grown moist, just like Kajii's were now, and she stared at Rika fixedly with a gaze hot enough to burn right through her. She'd known back then that lots of girls wanted her. Even though she'd understood that she was desired as a substitute for a man, Rika had felt as though she was being validated in her entirety, in a way that made her special. Come to think of it, it was from around that point on that she had taken care that her body didn't become rounded and soft. Ensured, too, that she was the best in both her studies and in sport, that she was boyishly rugged and aloof in her behavior, all the while taking care that these efforts went undetected by people around her. In order to fulfill the wishes of the girls around her for a prince, she needed to excel at everything with cool, calm composure. Sometimes, with a classmate of her choosing, she would open the first couple of buttons of her school shirt, allowing a glimpse of the sturdy nape of her neck and collarbone. She would casually drape her arm around them, brushing shoulders in a way that seemed totally unaffected. Through their uniforms, she could feel their pulses racing. Instilling desire in someone was a lot of fun, regardless of whether that person was male or female. But Rika had always believed that using your own wiles to excite someone was a malicious thing to do, in some ways, a base act, a dirty deed. Who had made her think that way? She wondered now. Knowing she'd instilled desire unwittingly in someone whom she wanted nothing to do with would send shivers down her spine, and she'd be swallowed up by a wave of self-hatred. But if the person in question was someone she deliberately targeted, then surely her success didn't devalue her in any way. A true emotion, one that she'd been holding back all this time, moved through her body. Would she be able to put a stop to this? She wondered with concern. Merry Christmas, Rika, Kajii said in a voice thick and sweet as savarin syrup. The sound reverberated until it was absorbed by the cold, hard walls of the visiting room.